When I was 20, I was out of a job and didn't have any university or plans on going to university. I was basically lost in limbo without knowing where to turn next. I was living at home and spent hours on the internet, staying up all night and sleeping all day. I was a bit of an introvert and preferred the company of me, myself, and I. Staying up through the night and disregarding the day as a way out of the norm and avoiding people altogether. Then I got the classic talk from my dad that all kids get when they're useless, sitting at home doing nothing. I was tired of hearing it, so I decided I need to move out to continue my lazy antisocial behavior. I have a family way up north in the sticks. There is nothing around except a couple sawmills and a couple nickel mines. My grandfather has a piece of property that's over 350 acres of unexplored bush. It was hardly farmable, just a giant section of woods, streams, and ponds and rocks. My grandfather has a timeshare in Florida, so he was gone for the rest of the year. I called him and asked if I could go up there to live. In exchange, I would do lumberjacking for wood to sell and use. I remember his comments exactly.
Yeah, I don't give a shit. You're wasting your time up there. No work, no school, no people, no internet. But if that's what you want, go ahead and knock yourself out. Just don't burn down my fucking house.
My bags were already packed. I knew he wouldn't mind. I told my dad what I was doing. He was pretty much speechless and had a look of concern. He told me I was wasting my life and should go to school. I told him it was what I wanted and needed to do. We parted ways. I got in my '93 Civic hatch that had shot suspension, bald tires, and took a 14-hour car ride to no man's land. I was happier than a pig in shit. I made myself good and comfy when I got to the house. It was given to my grandfather by an Irishman that passed on. He built the house with his family in the mid-1800s as a kid, and been there ever since. If you ever seen the Amityville Horror, it looks just like that house, but much, much smaller. The stove was an old black cast-iron beast, the kind you only see in movies or an old historic village tour. It had a large barn full of tools and an old JD tractor, a smokehouse for meats, a large veggie garden, an outhouse and chicken coop that wasn't in use anymore. After unpacking and relaxing, the distance and fact that I was alone began to set in. There wasn't a TV, internet, or video games in sight. Luckily, my grandfather had 2 snowmobiles, a 4-wheeler, a gator, and dirt bike, and lots of hunting rifles, and shotguns to boot. I figured most of my time would be spent outdoors, which was okay, but I was a bit nervous. The next day I drove into town, if you could even call it that. I stocked up on canned goods and cupboard food and that could survive a nuclear holocaust. I came back and got to the lumberjacking. It was slow at first to remember everything my grandpa had shown me as a kid, 8 through 12 years old. But after 4 or 5 hours, I had it down pat. I'd take the tractor, chains and hooks, a jerry can and a chainsaw to the bush. I'd find a cedar or spruce tree, cut it down, chain it up to the tractor, and drag it off to the main trail where I had a normal flatbed trailer waiting. I'd then cut it up into 2 to 3 foot sections and stack it. Once the trailer was full, I'd tow it to the barn, where in the back was a large hydraulic wood splitter. I'd split it into 4 to 6 sections, depending on diameter of the piece. Once I cut it all, I stacked it all. This was routine. It was long and hard work, but it gave me a purpose and gave me joy. I thought of myself as a pioneer. I was in the great outdoors, alone, taking down trees and supplying villagers with something they needed to survive. I felt proud of myself. I made cash doing it. While I wasn't getting rich, I had enough for all the necessities that were needed to survive in such a place. I kept this routine for months, and locals began coming to me for wood because it was cheap, and I was a youngster looking after my grandfather's home, who was well thought of in town. Then winter came and everything went to shit. Winter on the farm was one of the most depressing times of my life, not being able to do much work and have no interesting human contact or internet really brought me down. I reflected on my life and the fact that I had no friends anymore because I had abandoned them with no warning. Why I did this, I don't know. But I had some type of mental feeling that I had to leave everyone behind and never speak to them again. I began having suicidal thoughts. The more I thought about offing myself, the more I accepted it as being the okay thing to do. I wasn't religious, so I didn't have the thoughts of going straight to hell. I viewed it more as, if a goldfish were to die, where do you think it would go? I think it doesn't go anywhere, it's just dead. Blackness, no more thoughts. Like turning off a car for good. I thought about how my family would miss me and how it would hurt them, but I was so depressed, unhappy, and discomforted by my progress in life and the fact that I had no one. After a few weeks of negative 30 degrees Celsius weather and brutal snow, I decided to get on a snowmobile, load up my snowshoes, take my rifle, and go deep into the bush to end my mental suffering. I had given up on everything. I jumped on the sled at 8 a.m. The sun was brighter than ever. You couldn't look anywhere without squinting your eyes like an Eskimo. The sun reflected off the snowy landscape as if it were a mirror. With a full tank and a jerry can as backup, I could go a long ways away. I let the Skidoo idle and get warmed up. I was thinking to myself that I may actually go through with this. I kept going over what ifs and buts in my head, as if I were trying to talk myself out of it. I said fuck it out loud and jumped on the Skidoo and let it rip. I took the tractor trail as far as I could go into the bush. It ends after a solid 45-minute drive, then turns into four-wheeler and gator trails. I took a trail deeper and deeper. After a solid 2.5 hours of riding, the trail stopped and did a U-turn. It was the end of the track. I then grabbed my rifle, put on my snowshoes. I quickly realized something. I hadn't written a note for anybody to find my body or even know what I had done. I knew that if my parents had no idea what happened to me, they would wonder for the rest of their lives, and it would tear them apart. I cursed myself out and threw my rifle. I paced towards my sled and repeated all the cursing. I started to turn and remember I literally just threw my rifle. I got off the sled and walked towards it. I bent down and grabbed it. It stood up, then froze stiff. A burst of adrenaline was injected throughout my entire body and turned my cold frame into a steel oven. There was a black figure in the distance, hiding behind a tree, watching me. It wasn't an animal. It looked like the shape of a man. But it wasn't a man. I ran onto my sled and hit the throttle. I ripped back home and didn't look back. To get back home, it took me maybe 2.5 hours. I rode hard. I got inside the house, and I pigged out. As I ate, I kept that thing's image in my head, and I was wondering what it was. How did it get there? For how long has it been there? Does it know I'm here? How could it survive? Is it coming for me? Can it follow my snowmobile tracks? Does my grandpa know? Then I decided to call my grandpa. He didn't answer his phone. He was probably chilling on the beach, drinking beers. I thought, fuck. I called my dad just to calm my nerves. He could sense something was off about me, asked me what was up. I told him I was out hunting and had seen something. I described what I saw, and he went silent over the phone. He took a breath and said,
Listen, when I was a kid, living on the farm, me and a girl went back to the lake for a swim. We got there on our bicycles. It was around August or something like that. I had my rifle with me because of all the bears that went through there. After me and the girl were swimming around and laughing and, doing our thing, she screamed and pointed across the lake. I looked, and there stood what looked like a burned human being. He was charred up, had a bit of hair on his head, eyes as bright and as blue as I had ever seen. Its arms were long, its hands nearly came to its knees. It screeched at us with the loudest voice I'd ever heard, that the birds even flew out of the trees. I ran out of the pond, grabbed my rifle, and shot at it. It ran back into the trees, and me and the girl got out of there, quick. That was the first and final time I'd ever seen that thing. I actually hadn't thought of it in years and years until you told me that. Listen, you really need to be fucking careful, son. In fact, why don't you just come home? It's boring up there anyways.
I told him I was staying and enjoying it here. I was lying now. I got off the phone with him feeling no better. The only difference was I could think clearer. I thought, if this thing is coming for me, it's going to take a while by foot. I had time. I got the guns and put a loaded one in every room. Some had slugs, some had shells. I also had a hatchet that I sharpened to a very fine thickness with a stone grinder in the barn. If I swung at your wrist with one swift motion, probably take your hand right off. Or at least leave it hanging by a thread. As nightfall drew closer, I made one final meal, killed all the lights, left all the blinds open for good visibility, and to make it harder for whatever it is out there to see me inside, I went upstairs, which has 2 bedrooms that had large windows and one walkout balcony. I thought this would be an excellent spot to watch and snipe. As I settled in to see if this thing would come, I began thinking about what I was going to do earlier. I was still depressed, but because I was active and keeping my mind onto something, I didn't feel like offing myself anymore. Maybe that was it, I thought. Keeping active, busy and productive, with a bit of excitement thrown in to keep your mind off shit that doesn't really matter anyways. Just as I was having a bit of a personal milestone, I heard heavy footsteps in the snow. I looked out the window, and before my eyes stood that thing I had seen earlier, but now in full view. I got a strong feeling of nervousness, and my abdomen tightened and barked at me, as if I were about to shit myself at any moment from sheer fear. It was just as my dad described to me. Piercing blue eyes, almost glowing. Moonlight reflected off of them, like the cover of the dark side of the moon. It had the color and appearance of the grit in the bottom of your barbecue if you don't clean it much. I ran out on the porch to get a shot off. It darted off around the house before I could even lift my weapon. Fuck. I ran inside again, ran to the other window. I could see it again, just standing there like an idiot watching me. I turned the crank and the window opened up. I shouted out, asking what it was, who it was. It didn't respond. It just stared at me. I repeated, yelling at it, to tell me who it was, or I was going to shoot it. It then said its name, in a slow, drawn-out, harsh voice.
Jerdak. My name.
What do you want with me? I'm minding my own business out here. What are you doing here? Please, leave me. It then walked closer to the house and looked up at me. My nose was filled with the most pungent odor ever. It then said,
If you won't, I will.
"Do what?"
Kill yourself. You failed.
My heart froze. I decided not to do it. It then stretched its arms out to the wall of the house and began scaling it like it was a fucking spider. I panicked and fumbled my rifle. It fell right out the fucking window, and by that time it was only a few feet away from the opening. It reached its god-awful hands into the window and cut my arm with its fingernails. I grabbed my hatchet and buried it into its forearm, and it made a sound a bear makes when you shoot it. It fell to the ground on its side, and I ran for the spare gun in the room. I came back to the window, and it was running for the barn. I took a shot, but it didn't do much. This gun had a shell, and it isn't ideal for the range I fired at. I pushed my dresser down the stairs, then my bed, and then a few tables. I essentially clogged it up so it couldn't get up there from the main floor. I knew it could climb, but I preferred only having to cover the door and the window than multiple sides. I locked the door and just kept my eyes and ears open. I didn't see it again. Daybreak came quick. I could see its blood droplets in the snow. I climbed over and pulled shit out of the stairs and investigated. It was nowhere to be found. I grabbed my rifle, followed the droplets. It went down the tractor trail. I walked for 10 minutes following this trail. I could see it go off even further, and its foot tracks as well. I decided it wasn't worth it to go ahead and hunt it. It probably went as deep, if not deeper, the first time I had seen it. I decided it was time to leave this place for good. I went inside, grabbed my clothes, got into my car, and started driving off. I never told my dad or my grandpa. I still have nightmares of this thing. Wonder how it knew what I was thinking or going to do. I've been trying to research other sightings and descriptions of it, but I can't find anything, unfortunately. I don't know what to say, if it's a demon, because I don't really know or believe in that religious stuff. I don't know what it is. No idea. All I know is for the last 8 years since it has happened, I've had a slew of health problems and bad luck. I have night terrors of Jerdak almost 95% of my sleeps. I have to take medication just to fall asleep. I think it may have been the nail that cut me when I reached into the window. I often wonder if it's still up there.